What do you think of when you hear the term Yardstick Church? Do you have a slightly bitter taste in your mouth? Does it kind of stick to your tongue? Does it make you pull back and recoil a little bit at the thought? Someone's judging you. They're looking at you, everything that you're doing, that judgmental behavior, the condescending looks. Does it make you think of overbearing individuals with power and position telling you what to do? I've heard it thrown around a couple times. I won't say that I've been in the church long enough or was old enough to remember all of that. But today I'd like to welcome you to the Yardstick Church. Welcome! I'd like for us to replace what it may have meant to be a Yardstick Church with what it means to actually be the Yardstick Church. Because there's a big difference. We as humans like to swerve on the road, and very often we find ourselves in a ditch and we're not balanced and we're not really going down the straight and narrow. It's hard to find that path. We read about that in Matthew. It's difficult. But today I'd like to kind of do a paradigm shift. Again, I'd like to welcome you to the Yardstick Church and figure out what it is that we need to be doing. I have 3 easy points here. The first is we need to get rid of our aversion to yardsticks. We like to be protective as humans. We like to protect ourselves. We like to make sure that who we think we are, how we think, what we have. We like to make sure that other people don't tell us what to do. We like to make sure that they don't tell us how to act, how to think, or what to do with our stuff. And God gave Israel the 10 Commandments. Those are overarching rules to follow. He gave Israel statutes that are specific laws for the nation's structure. And God gave Israel judgments as binding decisions, kind of like precedent in our courts today, to show how to interpret the commandments and the statutes. And so God told Israel how to act, how to think, and what to do with their stuff. So when we have that human urge, that tendency to pull back and to recoil when someone's trying to tell us how to act, how to think, and what to do with all of our stuff, guess what? We're called to a way of life where we have a great and awesome Father who not just tells us how to think, how to act, and what to do with all of our stuff, but He gives us the tools with which to successfully do that. Let's turn over to Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20. We're going to look at that measure, that yardstick that God gave to His people. Exodus chapter 20, we'll start in verse 1. It says, God spoke all of these words, saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. I myself put in a therefore, because I did these things for you. Therefore, go to verse 2, you shall have no other gods before me. Therefore, you shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in the heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing mercy to the thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. And you can go down through the rest of the commandments here, and we see in the first 4 commandments, God gives the rationale behind why we are to obey Him, why we are to love Him, why we are to follow these commandments that He's given us, why we need to have that yardstick, that measure at the forefront of our minds. If you go on, after God finishes giving the commandments, you'll see in verse 18 of Exodus 20, it says, all the people witnessed the thundering, the lightning, the lightning flashes and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood afar off. They were scared of the measure. They were scared of what they were told to do. And they recoiled. And they pulled back. Are we reacting like the Israelites did when we're given that yardstick, or we think of a yardstick or a measure or judgment? Do we recoil? Do we pull back? Let's turn over to Matthew chapter 23. Matthew chapter 23. It's a pretty familiar passage with Christ speaking to the Pharisees and the scribes and the Pharisees. You can call this the initial woes. You have the woes in Revelation, but here it's woe to the scribes and the Pharisees and your mindset that you have. And he's speaking to the multitudes, and he's saying to the scribes and the Pharisees in verse 2, he says, "Therefore, whatever they tell you to do, to observe, that observe and do, but do not do according to their works. For they say and do not do. They bind heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers." See, they knew the law. They knew the measure. They knew the standard that was laid out by God. And they wanted everyone else to follow it. Christ goes on. "But all their works they do to be seen by men. They make their phylacteries broad and enlarge the borders of their garments. They love the best places at the feast, the best seats in the synagogues, greetings in the marketplaces, and to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi. But you, to us," he says, "do not be called Rabbi, for one is your teacher, the Christ, and you are all brethren. Do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your Father, he who is in heaven. Do not be called teachers, for one is your teacher, the Christ. But he who is greatest among you shall be your servant." He's saying there's a mindset change. There's something that your human nature wants you to do. It wants you to seek this out. It wants you to think about the standard, to think about that measure that we're supposed to be held to. And it wants us to go ahead and do the opposite. It wants us to pull back. It wants us to demand that of other people, but not of ourselves. Christ here, if you go through the entire thing where he's speaking to the Pharisees through, and you start into the woe in verse 13, it says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. For you neither go in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. You are being a stumbling block. You're closing the door. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. Therefore you will receive greater condemnation." And at the end of this chapter, I think Christ changes his tone. It kind of struck me when I was preparing this message that he just railed, and he goes on a tirade against the scribes and the Pharisees for what they're doing, for the hindrance that they're being to the people of God, or that God is trying to call, and the Jewish nation. And he says, in verse 34, he says, "Therefore indeed I send you prophets, wise men, and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify, and some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city, that on you may come all the righteous blood on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Assuredly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation." And then he says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets," the one who has that mindset of being against me, "you who kill the prophets and stone those who are sent to her, how often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing." It's not just railing on the tirade against the Pharisees. He's pleading with them. How many times does God tell us and show us the way and give us the measure, and we try to recoil and pull back, but what does God want to do? He wants to gather us in. He wants to make sure that we're safe. He says, this is for your good. This is a good thing to have. Have and use this yardstick. In the same way, are we acting like the scribes and the Pharisees? The children of Israel recoiled when God gave them the law. The scribes and the Pharisees are presented with a plea to change, and what did they do? They sought to kill Jesus Christ. Do we sit back? Do we say, God's law is great for someone else, not for me? That's a tough standard to live up to, but you guys should do it. That's not what we're supposed to do. That's not who we should be. We need to get rid of our aversion to the idea of a yardstick, because we very much have a yardstick. And we're going to go over that a bit more. So the first thing we need to do is get rid of our aversion to yardsticks. The second thing, we need to understand what a yardstick is for. We need to understand what a yardstick is for. Now, I grew up in a family of 5. And when you have a yardstick, and there are 3 brothers, you can run around, a yardstick is not for beating those into submission. It very clearly shows on here, starting from 1 going to 36, this is for measuring. And so often we think, I've got a yardstick, I have the standard. Some of you may have grown up with a smaller version of this, getting wrapped on your fingers. But a yardstick is not for that. And we have a choice. We often confuse the purpose of yardstick. Let's go to Matthew chapter 7. In understanding what a yardstick is for, we have to know, some of those words that I said in the introduction. They make us cringe because we don't like them. But in Matthew chapter 7, verse 1, it says, "Judge not that you not be judged." There, throw the yardstick out. Don't do it. Judge not that you not be judged. For with what judgment you judge, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. And why do you look at this speck in your brother's eye, but not consider the plank in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, "Let me remove the speck from your eye," and look, a plank is in your own eye? Hypocrite, first remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's. The word here that is judge, which we so often cringe away from, is actually the Greek word krino, K-R-I-N-O, krino. Actually means to try, to condemn, or to punish. And there is one who sits at that seat that has the right and the power and the authority to do that. And that individual is not sitting in a pew right now. God and Christ have that right. They are righteous and they are the true judges. We are not to condemn one another, but it doesn't mean that we cannot look at the yardstick and look at the rule and the measure that's out there and discern what is right and what is wrong behavior, either for ourselves or for those that we're around. Whether we have to figure out whose company we want to be in or whose influence we would like to allow in our lives. We have to be able to rightly divide the word of truth. Let's go to James chapter 4. It's another usage of this. James does a great job of illuminating a bit more about this idea of judgment. James chapter 4, verse 11. It says, "Do not speak evil of one another, brethren. He who speaks evil of a brother and judges his brother, krino, he who condemns his brother, speaks evil of the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver who is able to save and to destroy. Who are you to judge another?" We are not here to condemn one another, but we are very much here to follow the measure, follow the yardstick, follow the commandments that our Father gave us. It's not bad to measure. It's not bad to know what it is that we're called to do or called to be, or that standard that we have to have. You can see in Revelation, John was given a reed to go and measure the temple of God. And there are multiple locations in the Bible that we are called, our body, we are the temple of God. And we have to act as such. We are measured. We are measured. And again, when the New Jerusalem comes down, there's a golden reed that is used to measure the city. Those who don't stack up to the measure aren't going to be there. And if we don't have enough courage to measure ourselves against what God has told us to do, then we're also not going to be there. It's 1 Corinthians 3:16 through 17, if you wanted to reference that, where we are called the temple of God. But we're supposed to measure ourselves against that standard. A yardstick, what is it for? It's for measuring. It's not for beating into submission other people, your siblings, or anything like that. It's for measuring. It is, by definition, a yardstick. A yard is 3 feet. And this yardstick was 3 foot long yesterday. It was 3 foot long today. It's going to be 3 foot long tomorrow. It is a standard, and it doesn't change. It is, again, by definition, 3 foot long. And we know that our Heavenly Father, who has given us that standard, is also the same yesterday, today, and forever. And that yardstick that we're measured against never changes. So we need to understand what a yardstick is actually for, and not to lord it over others, as we understand. A third point, we need to accept and internalize our yardstick. God has given us that measure. Upon baptism, we have the opportunity to have that standard live in us, to have that relationship with Him. I don't know about you, but as kids, I would assume we all wanted to grow up to be like our older brother or sister, or like our parents. I remember the wall. Every year, you'd breathe in deep, you'd put the book on the head, you'd maybe push up a little bit in your shoes because you wanted to be as tall as you could be when you went to measure against that wall, right? How tall are you compared to your older sister? How tall are you compared to your older brother? What is it, what is it going to show this year? We have that same opportunity. It's exciting. I remember looking forward to it, and I said, nope, not yet, because it's not your birthday. How old were you? Or how tall were you at that specific age? Right? It's something to look forward to. How much have you grown? We're coming up on the Passover. It's been a year. How much have we grown? Right? How do we measure up against that standard that we've been given? Let's go to Ephesians chapter 4. I don't think we can have this topic without looking at Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 13. Speaking here about spiritual gifts, breaking into the thought here in verse 13, it says, "Till we all come to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to a perfect man, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ." That is a summation of our walk and our calling and what we're supposed to be doing, to come to a measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. We're supposed to measure up. We're supposed to, back against that wall and do our best, with God's help, to measure up to our elder brother. That's a standard that doesn't change. It's no different now than it ever has been. And we're called to do that. Let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Now, those who have gone before us had the same standard. They had the same expectations placed upon them. And here we read 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 23. Paul is speaking here. He says, "All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but not all things edify." And in the end, all things are to the glory of God. They should be. That is where our mindset should be. He says, "Let no one seek his own, but each one the other's well-being." Eat whatever is sold in in a meat market, asking no questions for conscience sake, for the earth is the Lord's and all its fullness. Go down to verse 32. It says, "Give no offense either to the Jews or to the Greeks or to the church of God, just as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved. Therefore imitate me, just as I also imitate Christ." Take on the challenge, take on the responsibility of following and living up to that standard, that yardstick measure of our elder brother, Jesus Christ. And Paul, at the end of his life, was able to say, "I ran the race. I measured up to where I was supposed to be in the calling that God gave me and the responsibility that I have as a child of God." In the UCG booklet, The 10 Commandments, there's a summation wrap-up there at the end. It says, the section is called "The Choice is Ours." I'd like to read that. It says, "Each person must choose whether to obey the living God, who gave us the 10 Commandments. His standards can be the guidelines for our thoughts, the yardstick for our behavior. They can shape our minds and hearts, or we can ignore them and choose another way." We have that option to cringe and to pull back like Israel did, to think that, oh, these are great for somebody else, like the Pharisees and the scribes did. Or we can choose to have them shape our minds and hearts. It goes on, "In making our decision, we should remember Jesus Christ's words." It's quoting Matthew 19, verse 17. It says, "If you want to enter into life, keep the commandments. Accept this standard as your own. If you want to enter into life, keep the commandments." Going on, God admonishes us to consider our choice. "See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil, in that I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commandments. I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore, choose life, that both you and your descendants may live." And that last section is from Deuteronomy chapter 30, starting in verse 15. We have that choice. We have that same choice set before us, and he's saying, what are you going to do? Are you going to say, no, I don't like being measured. I think if you give me a little bit of freedom, I'm just going to go at my own pace? No, he gives it to us. And he says, don't bury it, because if you bury it, I'm going to give it to somebody else. I'm going to take it from you, I'm going to give it. Just because you have understanding of the standard, just because you know what the measure is, doesn't mean you get to keep it. You have to do something with it, and we have to grow. As children of God, we have been called to a way of life wherein we strive to live up to the standard. Now, whether you want to say that makes us a yardstick church, I would say it does. I would say we have a very strong yardstick. It doesn't mean we beat each other over the head with it. It doesn't mean that we take it and gloat and flaunt it about to people that are not within these walls. It means we have a lot of work to do. It means that we have to hold ourselves to that standard and not let ourselves slack off. And we strive to measure up to the fullness and the stature, the character of our elder brother, Jesus Christ. We have been given his life as our example, his life as our measure, as our yardstick, and the choice is ours. Do we get over our aversion towards yardsticks? The idea of judgment? Judgment is upon the house of God now. And hopefully we're all striving to be there. We're all a part of that, living our lives circumspectly in that manner. So do we get over our aversion towards yardsticks? Do we understand the reason that we need to be measured, that we need to have a measure? Where there is no vision, where there is no leadership, the people perish, they flounder. We've been given a vision, we've been given a very strong leadership, and we've been given a very clear standard. And there's opportunity to thrive. We just have to take that opportunity. And do we accept and internalize the measure that we've been given? Again, upon baptism, we get we get the opportunity to have that measure in us, living in us, guiding us, directing us. Are we accepting that? Are we utilizing it? Are we utilizing it to its fullest potential? We have to do that. We have to do that because we are in the Yardstick Church, and there's a lot that is required of us.